This girl is incredibly unfortunate. She was so concerned about her boyfriend's career that she went to jail for him for 5 years. But when she was released, he betrayed her. Scarlett then decided to take revenge on him. To understand why she trusted her boyfriend so blindly, we need to go back 5 years. Scarlett and Oliver had been in a relationship for 7 years. During this time, Scarlett worked hard to support them financially and help Oliver prepare for his civil service exam. Whether it was rain or shine, she worked without complaining. She had a job at a toll booth during the day and drove a rental car in the evenings. In her spare time, she also looked after Oliver's parents, who adored her. Everything seemed perfect when Oliver passed his civil service exam and became a prosecutor. But Oliver's mother began to see Scarlett, who didn't have a stable job, as unworthy of her now successful son. She started looking for new potential partners for him. Yet, much of Oliver's success was thanks to Scarlett's efforts. When he couldn't pay for tuition, she helped him, and even the car he drove to work was borrowed from her. Despite his mother's objections, Oliver proposed to Scarlett, and she believed all her hard work had finally paid off. However, their happiness was short-lived. One day, while driving, they were involved in an accident. Oliver got out of the car to check, and when Scarlett followed, he stopped her, saying they had only hit a barrel. Looking around, she saw nothing suspicious and suggested calling the police. But Oliver, having had some alcohol, worried it might get him into trouble. Scarlett, trusting him, and agreed to let it go. What she didn't know was that they had actually hit a pregnant woman, who was critically injured. Oliver saw the woman dying, but chose to ignore her to avoid any complications. The woman's boyfriend, Jackson, the son of a wealthy tycoon, was devastated when he lost both his wife and child. He demanded the police find the person responsible. The next day, Scarlett, unaware of what had truly happened, took the car in for repairs. The police reviewed the surveillance footage from the road and identified Scarlett as the car's owner. When they questioned her, she confessed to the accident, believing she was protecting Oliver, who had been drinking. Naively, she admitted to being the driver. The prosecutor handling the case was none other than Oliver himself. He lied to Scarlett, insisting he hadn't seen the pregnant woman and thought they'd only hit a barrel. Scarlett trusted him completely, believing they had built their life together over 7 years and he couldn't risk losing his job as a prosecutor. So, she decided to take the blame for the accident, pleading guilty to unintentional manslaughter, thinking it would result in a lighter sentence. Oliver promised to help her receive a minimal punishment. But while Scarlett continued her daily routine, Oliver made no effort to reconcile with the victim's family. In fact, Jackson threatened to ruin Oliver's career if justice wasn't served. Despite feeling guilty, Oliver couldn't bear the thought of losing his position and decided to let Scarlett take full responsibility. With the evidence in hand, the police arrested Scarlett. Her father, Mr. Wong, was shocked and devastated when he learned the truth. Desperate to help his daughter, he gathered as much money as he could and begged the victim's mother for forgiveness, even kneeling in front of her. However, she couldn't accept it, recalling the pain her daughter suffered in the cold rain, and she threw the money back at Mr. Wong. Scarlett, as trial soon took place, the prosecutor recommended a 5-year prison sentence for her involvement in the death of the pregnant woman. In prison, Scarlett faced harsh treatment from fellow inmates who despised her. On her first night, she was brutally tortured. During a medical checkup, it was discovered that Scarlett was pregnant. She eventually gave birth to a baby boy while in prison, still unwilling to tarnish her prosecutor boyfriend's reputation. She raised her child alone, despite how difficult it was. San was her motivation to keep going. Outside, after the traumatic events, Scarlett's father was no longer aware of his surroundings and couldn't take care of himself. Oliver continued to visit regularly, trying to help care for him. Today, a charity group visited, and Oliver was part of it. He deliberately brought extra food for Scarlett and made sure to check on his son. Because Scarlett had shown good behavior in prison and was also raising a child, the prison requested a pardon, allowing her to be released early. When Jackson found out, he was furious. His lover and son had died unjustly, yet the person responsible was getting pardoned after just 2 years. Jackson arranged a meeting with Oliver and made him an offer. If Oliver voted against the pardon, Jackson would promote him to a higher position. But if Oliver voted in favor of the pardon, Jackson threatened to ruin his career. Soon, the pardon process began. Scarlett urgently apologized for her past mistakes, promising that once she was released, she would seek out the victim's mother to ask for forgiveness. She vowed to live a good life, taking care of her son and her ailing father. However, upon returning to prison, the guards noticed bruises on her son's body and suspected abuse. They took San away, which terrified Scarlett. She frantically called Oliver for help, begging him to find out where her son had been taken. Meanwhile, Jackson was pleased with Oliver's decision to vote against the pardon. As a reward, he gave Oliver an expensive watch, a gift for his wise choice. After 3 long years, Scarlett was finally released from prison, and Oliver came to pick her up. Jackson was enraged when he witnessed their reunion. The first person Scarlett wanted to see was her son, but instead, she received devastating news. Her son had died from sepsis. Oliver had hidden this from her the entire time, not wanting to break her spirit. He then took her to visit the place where Son's ashes had been scattered. Scarlett was crushed, feeling like a lost soul. She couldn't accept this cruel reality. Oliver's mother also came to comfort her, telling her to think positively and move forward with life. But behind her back, she scolded Oliver, telling him not to waste his time on a woman with a criminal record. That night, Scarlett bought a cake and went to the river, reflecting on the short time she had with her son. Unbeknownst to her, Jackson watched from a distance. Since Scarlett went to prison, her father had developed dementia. To pay for his medication, Scarlett had desperately tried to find a job, but no one was willing to hire someone with a criminal record. Just when she was at her lowest, a phone call came in offering her a job. However, it turned out to be from Jackson's assistant. Not only that, but Jackson invited Oliver to a party, planning to humiliate both Scarlett and Oliver. At the party, Jackson arrived with his fiancée, Amelia, who he was soon to marry. Oliver also saw Scarlett there and, not wanting to embarrass himself, rudely told her to leave. Afterward, he mingled at the event, unconcerned. When Scarlett returned home, she was met by creditors demanding money. In order to treat her father's illness, her family had fallen deep into debt, and even their house had been sold. The current owner of the house was none other than Jackson, who ordered Scarlett to move out within 3 days. Realizing this was the lover of the victim from the accident, Scarlett didn't dare ask for mercy. In these tough times, Oliver was oblivious to her struggles and was instead busy comforting his wealthy friend, Amelia. With no family and no money, Scarlett had no choice but to bring her father to Oliver's house, asking for help. Oliver's mother was furious upon seeing her and scolded her, still hoping Oliver would cut ties with Scarlett. Fortunately, Oliver's father spoke up on her behalf, offering some support. Later, Scarlett went to visit the victim's mother, who immediately threw water on her and chased her away. Despite this, Scarlett bowed her head and asked for forgiveness. That night, Scarlett returned home, and Oliver helped her care for her father. He still had lingering feelings for Scarlett, so he moved closer to her, unintentionally revealing the burn scar from when she was abused in prison. Oliver was heartbroken, but Scarlett said that she no longer felt the pain. Oliver, trembling, gently placed his hand on her scar to comfort her. Afterward, he went out drinking with his father, who urged him to end things with Scarlett. He warned that, if they stayed together, they would both suffer, constantly reminded of their lost child, and feel as if they were living in sin. The next day, Scarlett's father went missing. Oliver told her to report it to the police while he drove around to search. Eventually, Oliver found him, but the father suddenly revealed that he knew it was Oliver who had caused the accident, not Scarlett. The father feared that Oliver would be exposed, and Oliver, afraid of being blackmailed, began contemplating something terrible. Scarlett, unaware of this, searched for her father all night. The following day, she received a call that her father had been found, but when she arrived, he was already lying cold and lifeless, his legs covered in bruises. Scarlett's heart felt as if it was being crushed. Jackson, who had been with her, stood silently, realizing for the first time how pitiful she had become. Oliver, embroiled in a lawsuit scandal involving Congressman Kim, was now on the verge of losing his job. After her father's quiet funeral, attended by only two former prison friends, Oliver didn't show up when Scarlett needed him the most. Realizing where his priorities lay, Scarlett proposed they break up. She didn't want them to continue tormenting each other. Oliver remained silent, accepting her ditch Amelia without protest. Now, with no family or home, Scarlett sought refuge at Hera's house, a friend who had helped her while they were in prison together. Meanwhile, Amelia, who had been in love with Jackson since their school days, struggled with her feelings. Despite Jackson's unwavering love for G, who had passed away years ago, Amelia was determined not to lose him. Feeling her self-worth was at stake, she decided to make Jackson suffer. She presented him with a contract for a marriage in name only, where neither would interfere in each other's personal lives. At the same time, Scarlett discovered that her debts had been transferred to Jackson's name. Furious, she confronted him, and Jackson coldly admitted that he did this so he could control her, torturing her at will. Scarlett, desperate, left him her phone number and promised to repay every cent of her debt. Meanwhile, Oliver no longer seemed to care about Scarlett. He had started working at an art office and flirted with Amelia, knowing that she could be his ticket out of poverty. He recognized her as the umbrella that would protect him. Oliver soon resigned from his job as a prosecutor, telling his parents that the salary was too low and that he had endured enough suffering. He didn't want them to struggle anymore. He then applied to work for Mr. Hahn, one of the wealthiest tycoons, offering him a collection of documents he had gathered during his time as a prosecutor. These documents would help Mr. Hahn exploit his competitors' weaknesses, and Mr. Hahn, impressed, immediately hired Oliver. Jackson, observing all of this from afar, realized that Oliver was a shameless opportunist. Once he entered the company, Oliver persistently pursued Amelia, even though he didn't truly love her. Jackson, not wanting Amelia to fall for someone like Oliver, continuously tried to break them apart. However, Amelia always defended Oliver, which only infuriated Jackson further. That evening, Oliver gifted his parents a large sum of money to help them open a store, and they were thrilled with his success. One day, while walking on the street, Scarlett ran into a former prisoner who had falsely accused her of abusing her son, which led to their separation. After learning about her son's death, the woman was filled with regret. She confessed that she had only followed orders from a man who promised to get her out of prison early and take good care of Scarlett's son. Realizing this, Scarlett's mind immediately went to Jackson, as he was the only one who held such hatred toward her. After revisiting old clues, Jackson realized that the night of the accident, Oliver and Scarlett were together. Jackson then sent a gift box to Oliver. When Oliver saw the photo inside, his face turned pale with fear. Although the case files stated that Scarlett was driving alone, Oliver was worried that there might still be missing evidence. He went to the police station to review the case file, unaware that the police were reporting all his movements to Jackson. Upon reviewing the CCTV footage, Oliver discovered that on the day of the accident, a passing car had filmed him fixing his vehicle. That car belonged to Chairman Hahn's group. Late at night, Oliver snuck into the corporation's surveillance room and found a video showing him driving that day. Happily, Oliver deleted the footage right away. Meanwhile, Scarlett, after learning that her son was indirectly killed, sympathized even more with the victim's mother. Even though she wasn't the real culprit, she still sought forgiveness. She started working for the victim's mother, and over time, the mother's attitude softened. Jackson watched everything Scarlett did from a distance. Under the pretense of helping Oliver with work, Amelia visited her private office. When she saw Oliver had fallen asleep, she kindly covered him with a blanket. Oliver grabbed her hand and confessed his feelings, asking what he needed to do to be worthy of her. Feeling awkward, Amelia quickly turned away, and Oliver packed his things to leave. Jackson's secretary went to the location in the photo because Oliver had booked the place for a proposal party, which the owner remembered clearly. They had taken many souvenir photos there. Confirming this, Jackson angrily confronted Oliver and vowed to expose him. Amelia, unaware that Oliver was the real culprit, continued to defend him. The next day, Jackson approached Scarlett and urged her to tell the truth. However, she remained adamant, claiming guilt to protect Oliver, even at the expense of her own life. Scarlett pleaded with Jackson to forgive her, saying she would repay her debt gradually. Jackson, suspecting she was in pain, decided to give her more time. Thanks to a friend, Scarlett found a job at a restaurant, unaware that the owner was Jackson. Jackson only observed her from a distance, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. When Oliver learned that Scarlett was working at Jackson's restaurant, he became anxious that they might grow closer and she could reveal the truth. He urged her to quit, but since finding a job was difficult, Scarlett ignored him. One day, a police officer arrived to question Scarlett, suspecting her of trademark forgery. Knowing her criminal record, the restaurant manager fired her to avoid trouble. Meanwhile, Jackson found out that Oliver had deleted the surveillance video. He told his staff to mention to Oliver that recordings from the past 5 years could still be restored. Oliver fell into the trap and, in desperation, broke into the surveillance room to erase the recorded data. Just then, Jackson arrived. Realizing he was cornered, Oliver nervously explained that he needed the data for a meeting, but Jackson found his excuse amusing. Jackson coldly told Oliver that no matter what secrets he was hiding, they would be uncovered. Jackson tracked down Scarlett's new residence and insisted she return to work to pay off her debt, threatening to sell her father's bakery if she didn't comply. The bakery was Scarlett's most precious possession, so she had no choice but to agree. The next morning, she returned to work, where her colleagues gossiped about her. Ignoring their comments, Scarlett focused on her duties. That day, the restaurant hosted a tasting event with Amelia and Oliver among the guests. When Jackson found out, he rushed to the restaurant and asked Scarlett to leave, but she refused, determined to do her job responsibly. When Amelia met Scarlett, she was visibly upset and sarcastically confronted her. Seeing this, Jackson rushed to help Scarlett, while Oliver privately approached her, assuming she was trying to embarrass him. Scarlett explained that she was working to repay Jackson's debt. Instead of understanding her struggles, Oliver accused her of making him feel sick every time they met. Despite all the hardships she endured because of him, he still spoke harshly. At that moment, Scarlett realized his true nature and left, deeply disappointed. Witnessing how Jackson had brought Scarlett to work and stood up for her, Amelia felt uneasy. Jackson didn't offer any explanations, simply reminding Amelia that their marriage was a contract and that she shouldn't interfere in his affairs. When Scarlett felt overwhelmed, she took out her father's shirt for comfort. She happened to notice a receipt from the day her father died and rushed to the store, where the owner confirmed that her father regularly bought cakes there, and Oliver had picked him up on that fateful day. Still troubled, Scarlett agreed to work at Jackson's house. The cleaning job was simple, and Jackson's sister even appreciated her cooking. After finishing her tasks, Scarlett asked to return to the restaurant. Jackson, wanting her to rest, made an excuse, asking her to summarize the ending of a novel for him. Scarlett reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Oliver was trying to flirt with Amelia, but she only saw him as a friend. The next day, Scarlett returned to work at Jackson's house, where she accidentally saw his signature and realized that it was Jackson, not Oliver, who had taken her to the hospital and paid the bills when she fainted. Just then, Jackson woke up, and Scarlett awkwardly explained that she was only taking the blanket to the laundry. After work, Scarlett told Jackson she would return to the restaurant the next day, not wanting her colleagues to struggle because of her absence. When she got home, Hyjin was waiting. Hyjin, filled with guilt over her son's death, promised to live with remorse for the rest of her life. Oliver also came to see Scarlett, suspecting that she had spoken to Jackson, as Jackson had begun reinvestigating the case. Unable to hold back any longer, Oliver accused Scarlett of being the one who drove that night, shifting all the blame onto her. Shocked and heartbroken by his betrayal, Scarlett asked if Oliver had been with her father when he died. Oliver nervously claimed that the landlady must have been mistaken. After Oliver left, Hyjin revealed that it was Oliver who had asked her to separate her son from Scarlett. Completely devastated by this revelation, Scarlett went to the bakery, where she discovered there was CCTV footage from that day. The next morning, with the help of Jackson's sister Hira, Scarlett went to the police station and requested to review the footage. Seeing Oliver appear on the recording, Scarlett was utterly shattered, realizing that the man she had sacrificed everything to protect was responsible for the deaths of both her father and son. Back home, Scarlett was filled with regret and self-blame. Jackson came to comfort her, sharing that when he lost someone he loved, he used revenge and hatred to keep going. He encouraged Scarlett to follow his example and promised to help her seek justice against Oliver if she told the truth. But Scarlett, weary of revisiting the past, refused. The next day, Scarlett confronted Oliver, but he harshly called security to remove her. Undeterred, Scarlett rushed in front of Oliver's car as he was leaving. She confronted him with the recording, but Oliver showed no fear. He admitted that he found her father annoying and blamed Scarlett for not taking better care of him, even suggesting she should have put him in a nursing home. Furious, Scarlett demanded that Oliver stop the car. Instead, he sped up, and the two struggled for control of the steering wheel until they nearly had an accident. Oliver finally stopped the car, and Scarlett forced him out, making him kneel and apologize to her father. When Oliver met someone who had always treated him like a son, he shouted in anger that he had no regrets and that the evidence against him wasn't strong enough to incriminate him. Scarlett vowed to bring him down, no matter what, causing him to lose everything and forcing him to beg for forgiveness. Around this time, news broke that Jackson's father was in the US for surgery, leading to a drop in the company's stock. Jackson was furious when he heard about it through the media, but the secretary explained that the chairman had ordered it and hoped Jackson would remain strong and lead the company in his absence. Meanwhile, Oliver deliberately leaked company documents. Jackson was furious, but without solid evidence, he couldn't take any action against Oliver. What Jackson didn't realize was that Amelia was behind it all, orchestrating things so that Jackson would come to her for help. At the same time, Scarlett was working tirelessly to develop a new sauce recipe to help Jackson secure an investment for the restaurant. Since childhood, she had made salad dressings with her father, giving her valuable experience. Jackson was grateful for her support during this challenging time. The next morning, news surfaced that a recording had been recovered. Oliver rushed to check it out, only to find Jackson waiting for him. When Jackson played the video, it showed that Oliver was the one driving. Oliver, however, dismissed it, claiming the footage wasn't filmed near the crime scene and thus proved nothing. His panicked reaction pleased Jackson. Oliver, enraged, went to confront Scarlett, accusing her of never asking him to confess and insisting she shouldn't bring up the past to torment him. In Scarlett's eyes, there was only resentment now, and she warned Oliver that she would be the one to drag him down in the end. Meanwhile, Amelia urged Oliver to stop President Young from signing a contract with Jackson. The next morning, when Jackson and Scarlett arrived for a meeting, they found Oliver had gotten there first. After tasting the restaurant's new sauce, President Young was impressed, but Oliver continued to stir trouble, highlighting the lack of unity within the company. Disappointed, President Young told everyone to leave, promising to make a decision later. Coincidentally, it was Jackson's birthday, and Scarlett had planned to bake him a cake. Despite the simplicity, this small celebration meant the world to Jackson. The next morning, Scarlett brought a box of cakes with the new sauce to present to President Young. That night, Amelia had arranged a birthday party for Jackson, but it was clear she did it just to provoke him. Witnessing Scarlett's struggles and frustration, Jackson told her to leave, though he did thank her for the box of cakes, which helped secure President Young's approval for the contract. Scarlett was overjoyed at the news, congratulating Jackson, but Amelia, seeing this, sarcastically remarked that Scarlett had killed G. Though deeply hurt, Scarlett didn't respond and decided to walk away. Jackson quickly followed her, leaving Amelia furious. Amelia had known Jackson since childhood and could tell from the way he looked at Scarlett that he had feelings for her. True to her suspicions, Jackson couldn't hide his emotions when he brought Scarlett home and ended up kissing her. At first, Scarlett resisted, but eventually, she reciprocated. The next morning, Scarlett told Jackson to forget what had happened the previous night, but Jackson insisted that he didn't regret anything. After work, Scarlett visited an old colleague at the toll booth, asking for a photo of Oliver's car from the day of her father's accident. Fortunately, the surgery for Jackson's father went smoothly, and he returned to Korea. After hearing rumors about Jackson and Scarlett, President Han asked his assistant to arrange a meeting with Scarlett. He thanked her for helping Jackson secure the contract but made it clear that she should stay away from Jackson as his son was set to marry Amelia. Humiliated by the situation, Scarlett apologized and left, but Jackson chased after her, desperate to explain. However, Scarlett refused to open the door for him. Jackson firmly stated that he would not repeat past mistakes, and no matter what, he would protect Scarlett. However, Scarlett didn't want his protection. She wanted to leave the past behind, but every time she saw Jackson, those memories resurfaced, tormenting her. She lamented that, if that incident hadn't occurred, Jackson would be happy with his wife and children. Seeing Scarlett in such pain broke Jackson's heart, and he told her he would leave and that she shouldn't torment herself anymore. The next morning, Scarlett went to the toll booth to gather evidence. It turned out that Oliver had indeed taken her father out of town and returned alone. Angrily, Scarlett confronted Oliver at his company, but he remained unfazed and challenged her, saying she would never get what she wanted. Later that evening, when Scarlett returned, Jackson was waiting for her. Still hurt and filled with resentment, she agreed to go on a walk with him. Jackson was the only one who could bring her peace now, and though she knew their time together was short, she greedily cherished it. Amid the company's scandals, someone needed to take the fall, and Secretary Kim volunteered to stand trial. Before heading to court, he met with Jackson. The chairman had never fully trusted Oliver and had secretly gathered incriminating documents against him. Secretary Kim entrusted these documents to Jackson, advising him to use them when the time was right. Upon reviewing the documents, Jackson discovered that Oliver and Amelia had been collaborating for a long time. Furious, he confronted Amelia, who confessed that everything she had done was out of love for him. Amelia wanted Jackson to understand that with her, he could have everything, but Jackson coldly rejected her feelings. Meanwhile, Scarlett went to Oliver's restaurant, determined to confront him despite his mother's attempts to stop her. Scarlett placed the prepared documents down, ready to expose everything, when Oliver appeared and forcefully dragged her outside. He threatened her harshly, but she was no longer the weak person he once knew. She confidently told him they would meet in court. The following morning, Jackson also presented documents to Oliver, proving that since he had joined the company, he had committed numerous illegal acts. Jackson gave Oliver one last chance to redeem himself, but Oliver showed no remorse. Instead, he met with Amelia, and they concocted a reckless plan together. After a long and stressful day, Jackson sought out Scarlett again, and just being together in silence calmed the storms in both their hearts. Using the documents Scarlett had left behind, Oliver's father confronted his son about his wrongdoings, shocked by how cruel Oliver had become. He urged him to turn back, but Oliver, now blinded by ambition, refused to listen. Although deep down, Oliver was genuinely scared, he knelt before Scarlett and apologized. However, Scarlett could see that his apology was insincere. He was only afraid of losing everything he had. Witnessing this, Hera angrily threw water at him and chased him away. The next morning, Scarlett went to court to submit her evidence. Oliver, in a last-ditch effort, threatened Jackson, revealing documents that showed the company had been embezzling public funds. Oliver even kept Scarlett on the phone so she could hear everything. He offered a deal to Scarlett, but Jackson reassured her to trust him and follow through with their plan. Scarlett chose to believe in Jackson. When Jackson discovered that Amelia had helped Oliver, he was deeply disappointed and declared that he would annul their marriage. However, President Han opposed this, stating that in the current situation, marrying Amelia was the only way to save everything. The next day, Scarlett and Oliver were summoned for a face-off, where Oliver stubbornly denied the evidence Scarlett presented. Afterward, a former colleague warned Oliver not to underestimate Jackson, as he might be digging his own grave. In a major turn of events, a news station reported that Jackson had accused Oliver of embezzling $6 billion from the company. It became clear that Secretary Kim and Jackson had been planning this all along. Jackson had once given Oliver a chance, but Oliver had refused it. Jackson wanted Oliver to understand that the higher he climbed, the harder he would fall. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, Jackson's company couldn't avoid heavy losses, and with the stock prices plummeting, investors began turning their backs on them, putting the company on the verge of bankruptcy. Chairman Han pleaded with his son to save the company, the place he and Jackson's late mother had dedicated their youth to building. Marrying Amelia seemed to be the only way to save it all. Jackson's stepmother also met with Scarlett, asking her to let Jackson go, suggesting that if she did, Jackson would not lose his career. The next morning, Scarlett arranged to meet Jackson. Though neither said it aloud, they both knew in their hearts that this would be their last day together. They headed to the countryside, doing things they'd never done before, choosing to spend the entire day together. Jackson didn't avoid the situation. He kissed Scarlett's scar, and through this simple act, they both understood each other's sincerity. The following morning, when Jackson woke up, Scarlett had already left. Though he loved her deeply, he knew he couldn't keep her by his side. Silently, he went to the wedding photo shoot with Amelia. Meanwhile, Scarlett went to her restaurant and requested a leave from work. At the same time, reporters approached Oliver's parents to inquire about the embezzled funds. Scarlett also arrived and exposed Oliver's true nature. To stop her from revealing more to the press, Oliver's mother confessed that Amelia was still alive. She had faked Amelia's death certificate, and the boy was currently being raised by a kind family. Oliver wasn't aware of this either. His mother had done it so that Oliver and Scarlett could sever ties. Seeing how much Oliver's mother loved her son but still chose to separate her from him, Scarlett was furious and demanded that the child be returned. The next morning, Scarlett went to see Jameson, but the boy no longer recognized her. Heartbroken, she scolded Oliver, who was equally devastated by the sight. Later, the police arrested Oliver's mother for forging a death certificate. In detention, she begged Scarlett to spare Oliver, thinking that revealing Jameson was alive would earn her gratitude. However, Scarlett was no longer the naive girl she once was. She was determined to let Oliver's mother experience the suffering her own father had endured. Jameson's adoptive mother also pleaded with Scarlett, asking to continue caring for the boy, as she couldn't live without him. Jameson was too young to understand everything, and she promised that once he was older, she would explain the situation. Scarlett entered the house and saw that Jameson was being well cared for. When Jameson came home from school, he saw his mother crying, so he spoke up to protect her and asked Scarlett to leave. Jackson, as a longtime friend, asked Amelia if she was truly happy. Although she had achieved what she wanted, Amelia admitted she was miserable. Jackson comforted her. The next day, Scarlett visited Jameson again, this time introducing herself as his aunt. Seeing that Jameson no longer resented her, Oliver could only watch from a distance. By now, Oliver realized he had missed out on the most precious things in life. Filled with regret, he sincerely apologized to Scarlett. Hera criticized Scarlett for making such a painful decision. Scarlett explained that she hadn't given up on Jameson, but she couldn't force him to live with her. What mattered most was Jameson's happiness. She couldn't let him endure the same pain she had when he was taken away. Eventually, Amelia decided to cancel the marriage and pursue her dream of studying art abroad. Jackson also chose to go overseas to develop the company. Clearing his debts before leaving, he returned the bakery to Scarlett. Hearing the news, Scarlett rushed to the airport, but she didn't say a word or try to stop him. They simply passed each other in silence. Amelia also said goodbye to Oliver before leaving, thanking him for always standing by her and wishing him well. Oliver's trial finally took place, where he admitted all his wrongdoings. Though justice had been delayed, it eventually arrived, and Oliver had to face the consequences. Although the legal punishment might have been lenient, Oliver would live with the weight of his actions on his conscience. 5 years later, Scarlett had restored the bakery, and Jackson returned. It was clear that they would continue their journey together, building a beautiful future. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.